What if your guardian angel visited you this Holy Monday and you never even noticed? What if they left their mark on something you experienced as perfectly ordinary and slipped away before you could acknowledge that you'd felt their presence? This isn't a rhetorical question. It's the very question Saint Teresa of Avila wrestled with for years, until God revealed something she never expected to find: that angelic visits don't arrive like lightning. They arrive like morning dew, silent, gentle, leaving behind 7 specific signs that can only be recognized if you know what you're looking for. Teresa identified each one. She wrote them down. She preserved them. And today, on this day that opens the holiest week of the year, those 7 signs may already be present in your Holy Monday, waiting for you to see them for the very first time. Because Holy Monday is not an ordinary day on the calendar. In the spiritual world, it is the first day of the threshold, the beginning of those days when heaven draws closer to earth than at any other moment in the entire liturgical year. Teresa knew this. She taught it, and what she discovered about angelic activity during this week is something that permanently transforms the way you live Holy Week. These 7 signs don't require ecstasy. They don't require visions. They don't require you to be a mystic or a saint. They require knowing how to look. And Teresa left in writing exactly how to do that, so that no devoted soul would ever have to pass through another Holy Monday without recognizing the visit they had already received. If this Holy Monday you feel that something about your day was different, though you can't quite say why, write in the comments, "My angel was here today." Because what follows is the complete map Teresa left behind to recognize those 7 signs, and each one only takes on its full meaning when you understand all the others. Holy Monday doesn't appear in popular devotional almanacs with the same weight as Good Friday or Easter Sunday. It has no great processions in every town. It has no dedicated mystery of the Rosary. And yet Teresa of Avila considered it one of the most spiritually charged days in the entire liturgical year, not because she decided it should be, but because she saw it, because in her life of contemplative prayer, in those years when God was opening the layers of spiritual reality to her one by one, Teresa perceived something in the early days of Holy Week that she found nowhere else in the year: a different density, a closer presence, as if the very air were inhabited in a way it simply wasn't on ordinary days. And it was not her imagination. Teresa was an extraordinarily rigorous woman when it came to her own inner experience. What she feared most, what caused her the greatest suffering in her years of mystical formation, was deception, being deceived by the devil, mistaking her own desires for divine revelation, calling supernatural what was simply natural. For this reason, she developed, with a precision that still astonishes theologians, a system of discernment that allowed her to identify with confidence the source of what she was experiencing. And when Teresa, with all that rigor, with all that healthy mistrust of her own perceptions, stated that Holy Monday carried a particular spiritual weight, she was not saying it lightly. She was saying it because she had verified it. Something occurs in the spiritual world during this week that Catholic theology confirms, and that the experience of contemplatives has documented across the centuries. Holy Week is not merely a memorial. It is not simply a pious remembrance of events that happened 2,000 years ago. It is a real, active participation in the mystery those events inaugurated. When the Church enters the Triduum, when the days become weighted with the liturgical memory of what Jesus lived hour by hour, something moves in the deepest layers of created reality. Liturgical time makes present what it commemorates, and the angels, who participated in that mystery from the beginning, who were present at every moment of the Passion, who were the first witnesses of the resurrection, respond to that time with an intensity that has no equivalent in the rest of the year. Holy Monday is the first day of that threshold. It is the day when Jesus, according to the Gospels, entered Jerusalem carrying the weight of what he knew was coming. the day he cleansed the temple, the day he began to teach with an urgency his disciples did not yet understand. And in the invisible world, that day marked the beginning of an angelic mobilization without precedent. The angels who had accompanied Jesus throughout his public ministry gathered around that week with an intensity that Teresa, centuries later, could still perceive in her prayer when she united herself liturgically to those mysteries. Why does this matter for you? Because the same angels who were present on that Holy Monday in Jerusalem are the very ones God has assigned to your soul. Your guardian angel is not a decorative figure from childhood devotion. He is a being of intelligence and will infinitely superior to your own, with a specific mission toward your soul, one he fulfills with a faithfulness that knows neither weariness nor discouragement. And that angel in this week, on this Holy Monday, is present with you in a closeness that has no equal in the rest of the year. Teresa explained this in the interior castle with an image that is difficult to forget. She said that the soul is like a castle with many rooms, and that guardian angels don't simply surround that castle from the outside. In certain moments, in the moments of greatest grace, they enter. They draw near to the most intimate rooms, and in those moments they leave signs. Marks the soul can recognize if it knows what it's looking for. 7 precise signs. But before Teresa revealed them, she raised a question that is the true foundation of everything that follows. A question about why most people go through life receiving angelic visits without ever recognizing them. And the answer she found has nothing to do with a lack of faith. It has to do with something far more specific, something that happened in the history of Catholic devotion and left entire generations without the knowledge they needed to recognize what they were being given. What was it that was lost? What did Teresa recover? And what are you about to receive? The answer begins with understanding why angelic signs are not what most people think they are, because there is a very widespread idea, even among devout Catholics, about how an angel makes itself known. An idea that Teresa completely dismantled. And once you hear it dismantled, everything else falls into place in a way you weren't expecting. Angels do not come the way they appear in holy cards. There is no blinding light, no visible wings, no voice resonating through the walls of the room. Those things occur in extraordinarily rare cases, reserved for specific missions that the history of the Church can count on its fingers. The ordinary experience of angelic presence, the kind your guardian angel exercises over your soul each day and with greater intensity on this Holy Monday, is completely different. It is more subtle, more intimate, more difficult to attribute to the supernatural precisely because it resembles the natural so closely. And that resemblance is not a flaw in the design, it is the design. Teresa understood that God, in his wisdom, arranged for the presence of angels in the ordinary life of souls to operate through signs that respect human freedom. Signs you can ignore if you choose to ignore them. Signs you can write off as coincidence if you prefer coincidence. But also signs that if you know them, if you have the map Teresa left behind, become unmistakable, completely unmistakable. And the first of those 7 signs is the one fewest people expect. The first sign Teresa identified is the sudden silence. Not the silence that comes because the noise stopped. Not the silence that has a natural explanation. The neighbor switched off the television, the children have gone to bed. But a different silence. A silence that falls over you without warning, in the middle of whatever you're doing, as if someone had turned down a volume you didn't even know was playing. A silence that is not the absence of sound, but the presence of something that sound cannot contain. Teresa described it in the book of her life, with words her contemporaries found difficult to understand. Yet anyone who has experienced it recognizes immediately. She said that before every authentic supernatural visit, before the soul perceives any other sign, this silence comes first, like a threshold, Like an antechamber the soul passes through without moving. Why silence and not light? It's the question her Carmelite sisters asked. It's the question you yourself may be asking right now. And Teresa's answer opens something in the understanding that doesn't close easily. She explained that light belongs to the world of visible forms. Light has direction, has origin, has intensity. Light can be imitated, can be counterfeited, can come from a source that is not divine and present itself as though it were. The devil, Teresa said, with the directness that made her so uncomfortable for some and so liberating for others, is perfectly capable of producing luminous effects in the soul. In fact, that is one of his most frequent strategies with people advancing in the spiritual life, imitating light in order to create confusion. But true silence cannot be imitated. The silence that precedes angelic presence has a specific quality Teresa described as active stillness. It is not the silence of emptiness. It is the silence of something so utterly full that it has no need of sound to make itself known. It is the silence a soul feels when something far greater than itself is drawing very close. And that quality, that specific density of angelic silence, is unmistakable to anyone who has experienced it even once. Teresa recounts in the book of her life that the first time she recognized this sign in her own experience was during a prayer that was not going well. It was one of those dry, arid prayers where the words feel hollow and the mind wanders endlessly. Teresa was struggling with her own spiritual exhaustion when suddenly that silence fell over her, not gradually, instantly, as though an invisible hand had stilled all the interior noise that had been scattering her. And in that silence, before anything else happened, Teresa knew she was not alone. Confirmation would come later. Other signs would follow. But the first was always this, the silence that arrives uninvited, which the soul recognizes before the mind has time to analyze it. What Teresa wants you to understand about this sign is that it does not occur only during formal prayer. It does not happen only when you're kneeling before the tabernacle or praying the rosary with beads in hand. It happens at any moment of the day, in the middle of a conversation, in the middle of a household task, on the way between one place and another. Your angel does not wait for you to be in a prayerful posture before drawing close. He draws close when he has something to give you, and that something may be needed at any moment of your day. And on this Holy Monday, that silence may have already visited you. Think back over your morning. Think of any moment when the interior noise of your day stopped suddenly for no apparent reason. When the running list of worries you always carry in your head was suspended for just an instant. When something you can't quite name settled over you with an unexpected gentleness. That moment, if you had it, was not coincidence. It was the threshold. It was your angel arriving. But silence is only the first sign. The second sometimes arrives alongside it, sometimes moments afterward. And when they come together, when silence and the second sign coincide in the same instant, Teresa says the certainty the soul experiences is so complete, it needs no further confirmation. The second sign is a cold that does not come from the air, not the cold of temperature, not a chill explained by an open window or a cloudy day, but a specific, localized cold that Teresa described as a freshness that descends, not on the skin, on something deeper than the skin, on that part of you that theologians call the sensitive soul, that borderland between body and spirit, where invisible realities make themselves perceptible in the most direct way possible. Teresa experienced this so many times that she could describe it with almost clinical precision. She said this cold produces no shiver, no discomfort, no impulse to cover yourself or move away from it. It produces exactly the opposite. It produces a desire to stay still, to not move, to do nothing that might interrupt what is happening. like finding a patch of cool shade on a hot summer's day when every part of you wants to stop and stay right there, exactly like that. And the reason for that cold, the theological reasoning Teresa built upon her experience, is that angels are purely spiritual beings. They have no body. They have no body temperature. When they draw near to the human soul with a closeness that Holy Monday permits, when the distance between the invisible world and yours narrows, the contrast between the nature of the angel and the nature of the human body produces that specific sensation. It is not supernatural in the sense of miraculous. It is simply the natural effect of contact between two orders of reality that do not ordinarily touch so directly. This sign, like the first, requires no special preparation to receive. It requires no merit. It does not require you to have reached any particular level of spiritual life. Your angel produces it simply by being close. And on this Holy Monday, if at any moment of your day you felt that freshness that didn't come from the air, that descended on something deeper than your skin, you already have two signs recognized. But there is a third that Teresa describes as the most recognizable of all for devout souls. A sign that has to do with something you should not be able to perceive. Yet in that moment, you perceive it with a clarity that stops you in your tracks. The third sign Teresa of Avila identified is the fragrance without a source, a fragrance that appears where there is no material explanation for it, no flowers in the room, no incense burning, no nearby source that could account for what you are perceiving. And yet there it is, clear, distinct, unmistakable. Teresa describes it in the interior castle with a precision that is remarkable for someone who had never studied phenomenology, but was describing her own experience with the exactness of one who wanted others to be able to recognize it. She said this fragrance does not quite resemble any known scent, though it sometimes carries elements reminiscent of flowers, of incense, of things we associate with the sacred. What makes it unmistakable is not the fragrance itself, but the way it arrives. It arrives suddenly with no transition, as if someone had placed it in the air of the room in the space of an instant, and it disappears the same way, not fading gradually as natural fragrances do, but gone at once, as though it had served its purpose and was no longer needed. In the history of the Church, this phenomenon has a name. It is called the odor suavitatis, the fragrance of sweetness, and it has been documented in connection with the presence of saints, with the proximity of relics, with moments of intense grace in the lives of ordinary people. It is not exclusive to mystics. It is not exclusive to canonized persons. It is one of the ways in which spiritual reality makes itself perceptible to bodily senses in moments of especially direct contact between the visible and the invisible world. Teresa did not invent this teaching. She received it from the Church and confirmed it in her own experience. But what she added, what makes her unique in her treatment of this phenomenon, is the specific connection between that fragrance and the presence of the guardian angel in particular. Not angels in general. Your angel, the one God assigned to your soul from the moment you came into being, the one who has walked with you your entire life. Teresa taught that each guardian angel has, so to speak, a sensory signature, a specific way of making itself perceptible that remains consistent over time for the soul it guards. Some souls receive it primarily through silence, others through the cold, others through fragrance, and some through all three signs together. A convergence Teresa described as one of the most consoling experiences a soul can have in this life. Why do these three signs appear together precisely on Holy Monday? The answer Teresa developed in her writings has to do with what she called liturgical sympathy. She didn't use those exact words. They belong to later theologians. But the concept is present in her thinking with complete clarity. The idea is this: a soul that lives the liturgical season with active faith, not merely observing the calendar, but entering it with the whole heart. experiences during the stronger seasons an openness that is not present in the same way on ordinary days. It is as if sincere devotion thins the veil from the soul's side, while liturgical grace thins it from heaven's side. And when those two thinnings coincide, the resulting closeness can be intense enough to manifest in all three signs at once. But Teresa also offers an important caution here, something that must be heard before we move forward to the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th signs. These first three signs, silence, cold, fragrance, are sensory signs. The body receives them before the soul processes them, and that means they can be confused. Not with demonic presences, which Teresa distinguished clearly because they produce precisely the opposite effects: restlessness, agitation, heat, unpleasant or overly sensual fragrances, but with the imagination of a very devout soul that desires consolation so intensely it can produce it from within. Teresa was completely honest about this. She herself went through that confusion. She herself had to learn to distinguish what came from outside from what came from her own longing for comfort. And the criterion she developed for making that distinction is so clear that once you know it, you are unlikely to confuse them again. The criterion is this: authentic signs of angelic presence arrive when you least expect them and when you least need them to feel spiritually well. They arrive in moments of dryness, distraction, spiritual exhaustion. They arrive when prayer is difficult and you are not in a state of heightened devotion that might produce them on its own. They arrive, in other words, without your emotional cooperation, and that is their most reliable mark of authenticity. If on this Holy Monday you perceived that sourceless fragrance, and you were in an ordinary moment of your day, not in a state of especially intense devotion, Teresa tells you not to write it off as imagination. She tells you to receive it with simple gratitude, without excitement, without any need to tell anyone for what it is: the sensory signature of a being who is with you and who wanted you to know it. But these first three signs are only the beginning. They are the signs of the body, the ones perceived by the part of you that has senses. The four signs that follow are completely different. They belong to another depth. And the fourth, which Teresa considered the most important of the seven, does not reach the body. It reaches the very center of the soul. And when it arrives, what it produces has no equivalent in ordinary human experience. The fourth sign is a peace that has no human explanation. Not the calm that comes from solving a problem. Not the relief that follows good news. Not the rest that comes from a good night's sleep or finishing a difficult task. But a peace of a completely different nature. A peace that arrives in the midst of circumstances that do not justify it. In the midst of pain, of worry, of a situation that hasn't changed in any objective way, and that remains every bit as difficult as it was a moment before. And yet there it is, settled at the center of your soul, as though placed there by a hand that knows precisely what you need, and in exactly what measure you need it. Teresa devoted more pages to this sign than to any other. In the interior castle, specifically in the treatise on the fourth dwelling places, Teresa speaks of what she calls infused peace. She carefully distinguishes it from the peace the soul can produce through its own efforts, which is real and valuable, but has very concrete limits. Infused peace has no visible limits from the inside. It fills all the interior space it finds available. And its most defining characteristic, the one Teresa emphasizes again and again because she knows it is what allows us to recognize it, is that it is completely disproportionate to external circumstances. Teresa wrote something in her own words that must be heard in full to understand its weight. She said that this peace is like water entering a vessel from below, from the very bottom, without noise, without effort, filling it completely without the vessel having to do anything other than simply be there. And she added that when the soul feels peace in that way, it can be certain it did not produce it. because the soul has no access to its own depths in that manner. That key belongs to another. That other is your angel. The theology Teresa builds around this sign is of a solidity that later commentators have found entirely consistent with the teaching of the Church. Guardian angels, Teresa teaches, have the capacity to influence the soul in a way that absolutely respects its freedom, yet can elevate its interior state when God permits it. They cannot change the will. They cannot force any decision. But they can deposit in the soul, as one deposits water in a vessel, a peace the soul receives without having produced it, which remains for as long as the visit lasts. And the duration of that peace is itself another sign of its origin. The peace produced by external circumstances lasts as long as the circumstances do. The peace the will produces through spiritual effort is valuable but fragile. It wears down with tiredness and time. But the peace the angel deposits in the soul during its visit has a solidity that cannot be explained by any interior resource of the soul. It holds even when circumstances worsen. It holds even as the mind keeps turning over its worries. It holds in a layer deeper than the level where worries operate. And that, says Teresa, is its most unmistakable signature. On Holy Monday, this sign carries a particular intensity because the mysteries this day opens in the liturgy are mysteries of anticipation. Jesus entered Jerusalem knowing what was coming. He carried those days with a peace his apostles couldn't comprehend, a peace that even bewildered them because it made no sense given what was about to happen. That same peace, the peace that surpasses all understanding, as St. Paul writes, is the one angels are authorized to share with the souls they guard in the days when the Church relives those mysteries liturgically. Your angel brought that peace to you today, not so you would examine it or analyze it or turn it into an object of theological reflection. He brought it so you could live inside it, so that in the midst of everything you are carrying right now, you could have access, even for a few moments, to the certainty that something greater than your problems is holding you up from below, from the very bottom, without noise, without any effort on your part. If at any moment of this Holy Monday you felt that causeless peace, that calm which the circumstances around you did nothing to earn, you now have 4 signs recognized, and the 3 that remain are the most personal, the most directly addressed to you, because the first 4 signs are, so to speak, signs of being, of the angel's presence as an objective reality. The 3 that follow are signs of mission, of what your angel specifically came to give you on this specific day of your life. And the 5th sign begins somewhere you may not have expected. It begins in your mind. The 5th sign is the thought that is not your own. Teresa of Avila was the first mystic in the Western Catholic tradition to develop a systematic treatise on how to distinguish one's own thoughts from thoughts that arrive in the soul from outside. Not from outside in the sense that someone speaks them aloud, but from outside in the sense that they settle in your mind with a clarity and specificity that does not correspond to your interior state in that moment. This requires careful explanation because it is subtler than the earlier signs and easier to misread in either direction. Easier to attribute everything to your own mind and dismiss the sign, but also easier, without the right discernment, to attribute to supernatural origin what is simply your own mind working well. Teresa resolved this ambiguity with the simplest and most precise criterion ever formulated on this subject. She said that a thought coming from the angel carries 3 simultaneous characteristics that are never found together in any purely human thought. The first is that it arrives with light, meaning it produces immediate understanding, not confusion. The second is that it arrives with peace, not with anxiety or agitated urgency. The third is that it arrives at the wrong moment, meaning a moment when you were not thinking about that subject, and there was no chain of associations to explain its appearance. Those three characteristics together, light plus peace plus unexpected timing, are the signature of an angelic thought. In the way of perfection, Teresa develops this teaching with examples from her own experience that make it entirely concrete. She describes moments when she was occupied with completely ordinary matters, managing the convent, speaking with a sister, working through a practical problem, when suddenly an entirely different thought appeared in her mind with a clarity that interrupted everything else. A thought about someone who needed prayer, a thought about a decision she had been putting off, a thought about a passage of scripture that suddenly illuminated something she had long been unable to understand. And Teresa learned to recognize those thoughts not by their content, which could be anything, but by that specific combination of light, peace, and unexpected timing that set them apart from her ordinary thinking. During Holy Week in general, and Holy Monday in particular, this sign becomes especially frequent because your angel has something to communicate to you, not in the abstract, something concrete, something tied to your life exactly as it is right now. A relationship that needs attention, a decision you have been putting off far too long, a person you need to forgive or from whom you need to ask forgiveness. Something God wants you to do during these specific days, something your angel has been entrusted with delivering. The thought will arrive with that triple quality, clear, calm at a moment you least expect. And the most important thing Teresa wants you to know about this sign is what happens when you ignore it. Nothing dramatic occurs. Your angel does not give up. He does not abandon you. He does not stop trying. But Teresa describes with a sadness you can feel across the centuries that when the soul repeatedly ignores these thoughts, when it systematically dismisses them as imagination or distraction, it gradually develops a kind of interior deafness. It doesn't lose the capacity to receive the thoughts, which keep coming because the angel never relents, but it loses the capacity to recognize them for what they are. And that is a genuine loss, a grace that passed through and could have transformed something real in your life. Teresa says the correct response to such a thought is not to analyze it for hours or consult someone before acting. The correct response is the simplest possible one. Take a first step in the direction the thought indicates, a small first step. Make the call. Pray for that person. Open that book. Write that letter. Whatever the thought is pointing toward, do it, not perfectly. Not with all the preparation you might want. Simply do it because your angel is not asking for perfection. He is asking for movement. This sign, like all the others, may have already visited you today. There was a thought this morning or this afternoon that arrived with a particular clarity, unlike the clarity of your usual reasoning. That came quietly, without frantic urgency, at a moment when you weren't thinking about that topic. And it pointed toward something concrete that is waiting for your first step. If you recognize it now, you still have time to take it. But there is a sixth sign Teresa identified, and it differs from all the previous ones because it does not arrive as a perception or a thought. It arrives as an impulse, a movement of the soul towards something you felt no need to do a moment before. And on this Holy Monday, that impulse has a very specific direction that Teresa described with a precision that will stop you when you hear it. The sixth sign is the sudden urge to pray, not the urge that comes because you have been telling yourself all morning that you really should pray and have finally talked yourself into it, not the resolution the will makes after a process of interior persuasion, but something different and more immediate, an impulse that appears without warning in the middle of whatever you're doing and moves you toward prayer with an urgency that does not come from duty but from desire, a desire that was not there a moment ago and is suddenly so present it is difficult to set aside. Teresa calls this in the Book of Foundations an interior calling. She distinguishes it carefully from other forms of spiritual impulse because of one characteristic that makes it unmistakable. Its origin is not in you. You cannot explain why you suddenly want to pray. Nothing in your previous emotional state accounts for it. You weren't thinking about God with any special intensity. You weren't in a moment of crisis that would naturally send you toward prayer as a refuge. Simply, without transition, the desire is there, complete, clear, urgent in a way that feels more like being drawn than being obligated. In the Book of Foundations, Teresa records the testimony of a Carmelite sister whose name she withholds out of discretion, but whose experience she describes in detail. This sister was in the middle of the most ordinary convent tasks, working in the kitchen, when she felt that impulse with such intensity that she had to stop what she was doing and go to the chapel. There was no deliberation, no moment of weighing whether this was the right time. The impulse was faster than deliberation. And when she arrived in the chapel, knelt down and began to pray without quite knowing why or for whom, she found in that prayer a grace so specific to a concrete need in her spiritual life that Teresa uses it as an example of what happens when the soul obeys this sign without delay. What the sister received in that prayer, what she found when she followed the impulse without questioning it, was exactly what her soul needed at that particular stage of its journey. Not what she would have chosen had she planned that time of prayer herself. What she needed, which is something different, more precise, and more profound than what one chooses when one decides to pray because it is on the schedule. Teresa teaches that this is the fundamental difference between the prayer we initiate and the prayer to which the angel calls us. The prayer we initiate is valuable, necessary, the ordinary sustenance of the spiritual life, and it must never be abandoned. But the prayer the angel initiates has a specific efficacy the other cannot have, because it is calibrated by one who sees clearly what the soul needs in that precise moment. The angel is not calling you to prayer in general. He is calling you to receive something specific that only that prayer in that moment can give you. On Holy Monday, this carries an additional dimension that Teresa develops from her understanding of liturgical time. This week, the Church is liturgically reliving the final days of Jesus before the Passion. Jesus prayed during those days with an intensity the Gospels record but cannot fully contain. He prayed in the temple. He prayed on the roads. He prayed in the moments of solitude he sought out urgently from the crowds around him. And his angels, those who accompanied him throughout his earthly life, participated in that prayer in a way the contemplative tradition has meditated upon for centuries. Your angel in these days is immersed in that same liturgical participation. He is living this week from inside the mystery, as he always has, but with the added intensity that comes from his union with you, with your soul that is also trying to live these days from within its faith. And when that sudden urge to pray visits you on Holy Monday, what your angel is doing is inviting you to join something that is already happening. Not to begin a prayer on your own, but to enter a prayer that is already open, already lit, already active in the spiritual world, with a place specifically held open for you. Teresa's recommended response to this sign is also the simplest possible. It doesn't matter where you are when the impulse arrives. It doesn't matter that you don't have a rosary to hand, that you cannot kneel, that you're in the middle of something you cannot entirely stop. The response is an interior movement, a turning of the heart toward God. Even a single phrase, "Here I am, thank you, I am listening." Whatever arises in that instant spontaneously, without rehearsal, without the polished form you might wish it had, because your angel is not calling you to perfect prayer. He is calling you to presence in prayer. And presence can happen in any circumstance, in any posture, with any vocabulary, or with none at all. What matters is the movement of the heart that responds to the call. If on this Holy Monday you felt that impulse, if there was a moment when you suddenly wanted to pray without quite knowing why, You now have 6 signs recognized, and the 7th is unlike all the others. Teresa saved it for last in her teaching on angelic visits, not because it is the least important, but because it is the hardest to recognize as a sign. Because it looks like sadness, it looks like weakness, it looks like exactly the opposite of what you would expect from a heavenly visit. And yet Teresa says that when this 7th sign appears, it is the most complete and most intimate confirmation the soul can receive that its angel was truly there. 6 signs: the sudden silence, the cold that does not come from the air, the fragrance without a source, the peace that has no human explanation, the thought that is not your own, the sudden urge to pray. 6 ways your angel left its mark on this Holy Monday. 6 moments you may have lived as coincidences, passing moods as nothing in particular, and which you now recognize by the names Teresa gave them more than 400 years ago. But there is a 7th, and Teresa warns, before revealing it, that this sign frightens many souls when they experience it for the first time, not because it is terrifying, but because it resembles something human so closely, something the person knows well from their ordinary emotional life, that the soul's automatic response is to search for a human cause, to ask what happened, what went wrong, what reason there could be to feel this way. And when no reason that fully accounts for it can be found, anxiety layers over the sign and obscures it still further. Teresa wants you to have the name of this sign before it arrives, so that when it does, you don't mistake it for what it is not. The 7th sign is tears without sadness, not the tears that come from pain, not the ones that come from grief, from loss, from accumulated frustration, but a specific kind of tears that Teresa describes in the book of her life, in the chapter she dedicates to the gifts of the Holy Spirit in the life of prayer, as tears that rise in the soul without any concrete sorrow to justify them, tears that don't quite know what they are crying for, or that seem to cry for everything at once, for the love being received, for the distance still felt from God, for the beauty of something the soul glimpses but cannot sustain its gaze upon. Tears that do not exhaust, that do not leave that emptied feeling left by tears of pain, that leave instead something more like cleansing, like having released something that was heavy without ever knowing it was. Teresa knew them well. She had them many times, and in the early years of her mystical life, before God gave her the understanding of what was happening, she lived them with a mixture of gratitude and bewilderment. Gratitude because the consolation accompanying them was real and unmistakable. Bewilderment because she could not explain them, and because in her time, in her cultural context, tears without visible cause could easily be misread as imbalance, as melancholy, as one of the traps of the devil she feared so greatly. Until understanding came. And what Teresa understood, what she preserved in writing so that no other soul would ever have to live through that unnecessary bewilderment, is that these tears are the human soul's response to contact with a presence that overwhelms it. Not overwhelms it with pain, overwhelms it with love. The human soul, for all its capacity to feel, for all the depth God gave it, remains limited, finite, incapable of containing without overflowing the proximity of a supernatural being who comes laden with the mercy and goodwill God has given him for that very soul. When your angel draws close with the closeness Holy Monday permits, when the distance between his nature and yours narrows so much that the soul perceives it even though the mind has no categories to process it, something opens in the interior. It does not break, it opens. The way a flower opens, not a tearing but an expansion. And that opening produces tears, not of sadness, of an excess of something that does not fit within the ordinary size of the human heart. Teresa says in the book of her life that these tears are a gift, not a gift that is earned or sought or produced through any personal effort, a gift that arrives. And when it arrives within the context of a life of prayer, in the strong liturgical seasons, in moments that have no human emotional cause to account for them, it must be received with simple, quiet gratitude, without dramatizing, without sharing it with anyone, without analyzing it until it evaporates. Simply let it be. Let the soul overflow as much as it needs to overflow. And when it ends, and it will end on its own, remain in the silence it leaves behind. Because that silence, the one that remains after these tears, is the silence most resembling God that the soul can find in this life. But Teresa adds something more about this seventh sign that must be said. She says these tears do not always arrive during formal prayer. They come in completely unexpected moments as well, in the middle of an ordinary task, reading something that had no intention of moving you, half listening to a piece of sacred music, looking out a window for no particular reason. In those moments when the interior guard is down and the soul is simply being, without effort and without aim, the tears can arrive suddenly, carrying that specific quality that sets them apart from anything else. And if they come on this Holy Monday, if at any point in this day your eyes filled without your quite knowing why, without a cause of genuine sorrow to fully account for it, Teresa wants you to know what that was. It was not weakness. It was not melancholy. It was not emotional fragility or the accumulated effect of a long Lenten fast. It was your angel so close to you that your soul could not contain it without overflowing. It was the most intimate of the seven signs, the most personal, the one no one else can see from the outside, the one that only you and your angel and God know took place. The seven signs are complete: silence, cold, fragrance, peace, thought, impulse, tears. 7 ways your angel confirmed its visit on this most sacred of days. And now that you have them all, there is something Teresa wants you to do with them, something that is the difference between receiving a visit and living in company. You have the 7 signs. You know them by name now. The silence that falls without warning, the cold that does not come from outside, the fragrance with no visible source, the peace that cannot be explained by circumstances, the thought that arrives with light and stillness from a place that is not you, the impulse that moves the heart toward prayer before the mind decides anything, and the tears that overflow the soul without sadness, with that cleansing that only love leaves behind when it draws too close to be contained by the human heart. 7 signs that were available to you today, on this specific Holy Monday, on this day that opens the week when heaven bends closer to earth than at any other moment in the liturgical year. But Teresa did not end her teaching on angelic visits at the moment she named the last sign. Because Teresa understood something many spiritual teachers of her time overlooked, that knowledge without response is incomplete. That knowing your angel was here, recognizing the 7 ways it left its mark on your day, only has its full value if that recognition produces something in you, a movement, a response, a different way of entering the days ahead. What is that response? What does the soul do, having recognized its angel's visit on Holy Monday, with the remaining days of Holy Week that lie ahead? Teresa says it with a simplicity that surprises those who expected something more elaborate. She says the response is gratitude, not the gratitude formulated as a structured prayer, not the kind scheduled into the devotional timetable, but gratitude as a state, a way of inhabiting the rest of the day, a filter through which everything that follows is received differently. When the soul has recognized that its angel was with it, when it can name at least one of the 7 signs it found in the course of its day, something changes in the texture of what comes next. Holy Tuesday is no longer just the following day. It is the following day in recognized company. The days that lie ahead, Wednesday, the Lord's Supper on Thursday, the cross on Friday, the long waiting Saturday. None of them will find you the same way they would have found you before you knew what you now know. Your angel goes with you. He always has. But now you know it differently. Not from hearsay, not from learned doctrine, not from reasoned faith. You know it because this morning, at some point of this Holy Monday, there was a silence that fell without warning, or a cold that didn't come from the air, or a peace you had no right to feel given your circumstances, or tears that didn't know quite what they were crying for, but left your interior cleaner than it had been. You know it because you lived it. Teresa says in the Interior Castle that there are two kinds of souls in the church: those who know about God and those who know God, those who have informed faith and those who have experienced faith. And the distance between those two kinds of faith is not covered by study or by will or by years of devout practice. It is covered by attention, by the capacity to be present to what is happening inside with the same seriousness you bring to what is happening outside. This week is the week of greatest opportunity for that leap. Because in the days ahead, Holy Tuesday and Holy Wednesday, Holy Thursday of the Lord's Supper, Good Friday of the Cross, Holy Saturday of Waiting, and Easter Sunday of the Resurrection, your angel will be present with that same intensity or greater. The same 7 signs will still be available, and now that you have the map Teresa left behind, you no longer have to let them pass unrecognized. Teresa recommends something concrete for these days, not as an obligation, as an invitation. At the end of each day of this week, before you sleep, give yourself a moment, no longer than it takes to pray the Our Father slowly, to look back over your day with this one question: when was my angel with me today? Don't look for a perfect answer. Don't demand a dramatic sign. Simply walk back through the day with the question open and notice what moment answers it. What instant had that different quality you now know how to recognize? And when you find it, give thanks. Not with elaborate words, with a simple phrase if you like, or in silence if the words don't come. Give thanks because He was there, because He came, because He left His mark on your day even when you didn't know how to see it in the moment it happened. Teresa says this practice, this grateful review at the end of each day, educates the soul in a way no other practice can replace. It gradually refines the interior perception. It makes the 7 signs progressively more recognizable in the moment they occur, not only in the review that follows. Until there comes a time, which Teresa describes with a tenderness that is difficult to read without something stirring within, when the soul no longer needs to look back over the day to find the signs. It recognizes them the instant they arrive. It lives in that recognition continuously. It moves through the world with a certainty that is not theoretical but lived, the certainty of not being alone, of never having been alone, of knowing that in every moment of its life, in those it was aware of and those it was not, in those when it felt the presence and in those when heaven seemed silent, there was someone walking right beside it, someone who does not tire, who does not lose heart, who does not leave, who is never distracted, who has carried the name of your soul written in their being since before you were born, and who will carry it still on the day they deliver you, complete to the love from which you came. That is your angel. And this Holy Monday, he was here. You stayed. You listened to the end. To the 7 signs Teresa of Avila identified with the precision of someone who lived them, verified them, and preserved them across centuries so that you could have them today. The silence that falls without warning. The cold that does not come from the air. The fragrance without a source. The peace that cannot be explained by circumstances. The thought that arrives with light from a place that is not you. The impulse that moves the heart toward prayer before the mind decides anything. And the tears that overflow the soul without sadness, with that cleansing that only love leaves behind when it draws too close to be contained. 7 signs. 7 ways your angel confirmed its visit on this Holy Monday. And now you have them, not as doctrine memorized by heart, as a map, as a key, as the understanding Teresa wanted you to have, so that no future angelic visit would ever pass through your life unrecognized. This Holy Monday was different from everyone before it, because this time you knew how to look. And the ones ahead, Holy Tuesday, Holy Wednesday, Holy Thursday of the Supper, Good Friday of the Cross, Holy Saturday of Waiting, all of them will find you with eyes open in a way they weren't before. That is what you carry with you today, not information. A new way of inhabiting your own spiritual life. Staying was worth it. But there is something more Teresa left in writing. Something found in those very same pages where these 7 signs were discovered. Something that concerns what happens afterward. What the soul that has learned to recognize its angel in the ordinary days experiences when it arrives at the most intense moments of the Paschal mystery. What happens on Good Friday for souls that have lived through Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday with that wakeful attention. What Teresa discovered about angelic presence in the moments of greatest spiritual darkness, when faith holds by a thread and the soul doesn't know if it can carry what it has been given to carry. There are souls who arrive at Good Friday empty inside, exhausted, carrying a weight that was already too heavy on Monday and that the days between have done nothing to lighten. And Teresa has something to say to those souls. Something she found in the darkest experience of her own spiritual life. Something the Church preserves as one of its most profound treasures about the mystery of suffering and the invisible company that dwells within it. About what the angel does specifically when the soul can no longer go on. About the way his presence transforms in the moments of the cross. About why the 7 signs you have just learned are transfigured in those moments into something that surpasses them. Something Teresa describes in words that are difficult to read without something inside yielding and surrendering to the love that holds them. If there is one thing your soul needs to hear this Holy Week, that is the message that comes next. It has been a privilege to walk with you through these pages that Teresa wrote, with a heart torn open by love and gratitude for what God had given her to know. She wrote for you. She didn't know you by name, but she knew you by your need. She knew that one day you would arrive, on some Holy Monday of your life, searching for something that would confirm you are not alone, and she left it in writing. As the saint wrote in the interior castle, the soul that knows its guardian walks through the world differently, because it knows that the loneliness it feels is not the loneliness that is. May the angel who was with you today accompany you through every remaining day of this Holy Week. May Good Friday find you still standing. May Easter Sunday find you in light. And in all the days that come after, the ordinary ones and the hard ones, the ones when faith costs something and the ones when faith consoles, may you remember that you have carried company since before your very first day in this world, and that company will not leave you on your last. Amen.